So around the turn of the 20th century, something extraordinary and vastly underreported happened. Our way of dying as a species changed. Imagine an alien landed on Earth in the year 1900 and she decided to survey the anatomy of human death, how we die and by what. She would learn that for thousands of years, our deaths consisted mostly of fast incidents, usually things coming at us quickly and from the outside. Tigers that snuck up on us in the blink of an eye, foreign particles that entered the lungs at the peak of biological youth. Until almost overnight, humanity engineers this chasmic shift from fast to slow dying, first in the West, then globally. By the end of the century, millennia-old scourges like smallpox and predators will be relics of a blurry past. For most of us, the end of life will go from abrupt and fickle to gradual and predictable. For the most part, death is now the result of our innate biology, mediated by medical and social systems over decades rather than minutes or weeks. This is new. We live longer than ever before, but we also spend more time in declining health. 20th century science doubled the average life, but we never achieved a corresponding increase in our health span. Still, what follows from this, from more life, is stunning. Even in imperfect health, it turns out human life is mostly a net good. This is my all-time favorite graph. It suggests more humans equals more solutions. As a result of human ingenuity, we have 8 billion of us on the planet and the most resources per capita we ever did. Of course, in 2025, we continue to suffer from some heart-wrenching cases of fast deaths. We have about 1 million deaths a year by the deadliest living human predator, the mosquito. 1.3 million deaths a year by car accidents. Another 1.3 by violence, mostly suicide. 2 million neonatal deaths a year. And a disheartening 3.5 million deaths by inadequate water supply. These are preventable deaths. This is how we understand and mourn them for the first time in history. We have many, if not all, the technologies we need to prevent, even eradicate this type of death. And we should. But what I will suggest is that these remaining 45 million deaths a year that owe primarily to our innate biology too are preventable. And that they're no less morally and economically urgent simply because they are predictable and universal. In fact, I will suggest the near universal quality of our newly slow deaths makes them more, not less, morally urgent. And you might think heart attacks happen quickly or cancer diagnoses come out of the blue, but most often, as evidenced by this graph, the diseases of aging are the result of damage that builds up over decades, not days. The median age of a cancer diagnosis is 66, the first heart attack 65, and a dementia diagnosis 83. Biological aging is the biggest risk factor for all the diseases in this graph. It's also the biggest risk factor for death by infectious diseases like pneumonia and COVID-19. And I think we can all agree that our recent doubling in life years is good. Biologically old humans are happier, healthier, and more productive than dead ones. There's just one catch. By the end of this decade, the US will spend a full half its federal budget on adults age 65 and older. That's about $3 trillion a year. Today, already, some 40 million Americans are unpaid caregivers of older adults. And the US is a young country. And so the defining question of our century, the question no government or family has answered, is what happens if we all keep slowly dying? If working age adults are causally linked to human flourishing, and if the number of working age adults is fast declining nearly everywhere, what do we do? I'll walk you through 5 possible solutions, and I'll go roughly from worst to best as I see them. So first, if the problem is economic, wouldn't it be easier to just turn everybody into smokers overnight or something so we all die quickly and young? This utterly misanthropic idea has been suggested by a number of bioethicists. If we all died at age 65, we could save about $3 trillion a year. But the solution is both short-termist and obviously inhumane. And I hope to prove by the end of this talk that the economy can grow far more and it can be a useful long-term proxy for human flourishing if we adopt a philosophy of humanism rather than disdain for human life. So 2, say we raise the age of retirement. The trouble here is that raising the age of retirement without altering our health span is at best a temporary solution, and at worst, it's a recipe for civil unrest. So 3, why don't we just build more robots? In the long run, it could be wonderful for humans to not be the primary drivers of gross domestic product. But my 20-second take here is that to assume all work will be replaced by robots is to overlook how fluid our definitions of both work and abundance have been. It's also to overlook how many problems there are to be solved on this planet, like the fact that we're all slowly dying, which will demand both natural and artificial intelligence. So 4, why don't we just have more babies? I'm broadly a proponent of pronatalism, but I'll just note a few facts. Newborns don't work. They typically take decades to produce more than they consume. Newborns also often remove their parents from the workforce, and they very predictably grow biologically old and chronically ill. So 5, imagine that through natural and artificial intelligence, we achieve the huge success of eradicating all cancers. This would add about 2 years to life expectancy. And this very humane scenario highlights 2 things. First, even curing a major disease like cancer doesn't change how we age and die. These would-be cancer patients would continue to depend on Medicare. Their odds of dying of a heart attack or a broken hip would remain the same. And second, the returns on investments in the life sciences are staggering. Economists Murphy and Topel estimate that curing all cancers would be worth about $80 trillion to the US economy in the long run. And that's just 2 extra years, not all of them healthy. And this brings me to option 6, what I believe will be one of the most profound breakthroughs in human history, exceeding the impacts of germ theory and birth control and antibiotics and its ability to redesign how humans live, work, give birth, and die. If aging itself is the biggest risk factor for most deaths in the 21st century, then why not heavily invest in the young science of aging, which despite trendy headlines receives quite little funding for serious research? And if we choose to take R&D on aging seriously, how could the US economy and population look like? So first, I interviewed 102 scientists to find out what R&D advancements are underserved by commercial incentives but could result in outsized returns. And the answers ranged from ovarian aging and mapping the causality between aging ovaries and a shorter health span to the novel concept of replacing aging and its parts, which you can learn more about in my upcoming book for Harvard University Press. Out of 102 scientists I interviewed, 0 replied that age reversal is impossible. There's no consensus about how it will be done, but we know it can be. Nature itself has produced mammals like the bowhead whale, who lives to be 200, largely without frailty or Alzheimer's. The American lobster, my favorite animal, even becomes stronger and more fertile with age. In a 1993 study, changing 2 genes in C. elegans worms resulted in the equivalent of a 400-year-old human in seemingly good health. And unless humans have some sort of special snowflake spark that prevents us from changing how we age, like we've done, depending on your definition of aging, in animals from mice to non-human primates, we will find the genes and predictive biomarkers of human longevity. And we have some exciting efforts underway, like the $100 million health span X Prize I helped design, and a number of labs working on aging, many of them here at Harvard. Today, we know that exercise can temporarily reverse some hallmarks of aging, but the reason why giant tortoises can live to be 200 and never get cancer isn't because of their daily step count. And so here are the questions I set out to answer with an incredible team of economists and scientists. We wanted to know, how could tiny advancements in the biology of aging impact US GDP and population growth? What would be the economic value of making 41 the new 40 or 65 the new 60? So we ran a number of macroeconomic simulations with consistently staggering results. In the long run, these returns compound, just like in Murphy and Topel's 80 trillion study on cancers, and they compound in different ways. From a GDP standpoint, advancements in ovarian aging are most valuable about 50 years in the future, while healthier brains offer immediate returns. And we didn't model the value of eradicating aging, like Murphy and Topel did cancers. We wanted to focus on what is likely in the coming decade. So the most ambitious question we asked was, what if people aged 40 and older in the US behave like people 5 years younger in the economy and in hospital settings, except they can still retire at age 65? And the results are extraordinary. This 5-year shift backwards in biological aging would yield over 100 trillion to the US economy over several decades. Even in the short term, it would add about 2 trillion per year to US GDP, or roughly the equivalent of adding a Canada-sized economy to the US every year. How do we get such large results if Social Security is so costly? This is what lifetime earnings look like for Homo sapiens. Our income is stunningly triangle-shaped. Most of us peak income-wise around age 58, then very predictably our income falls or we stop working primarily as a result of how we age. So changes in the biology of aging are unique in that they can extend our productive time at the peak of this triangle. That's like importing millions of highly experienced workers from a highly developed country, namely the United States. And what I love about GDP and the model we use, co-developed by my co-authors Jason DeBacker and Richard Evans, is that it doesn't undervalue the wisdom and knowledge we've accumulated by our 50s. In fact, our results on slowing reproductive aging are only positive in the first 2 decades because we see them as investments in older adults who would otherwise suffer from conditions like menopause, often at the peak of their career. Today, adults aged 65 and older are the fastest growing labor group in the economy. But every year, millions of Americans stop working because they or their parent or spouse receives an age-related diagnosis. Or they keep working past their cognitive health span. Politicians are a case in point. And so the closest thing to an economic free lunch we can get is letting people work in good health when they want to. Now, if these returns are so large, why don't we have aging drugs? One explanation is that it's just technically difficult. But especially in technically demanding fields like Alzheimer's or climate science, public and philanthropic funds, and a sense of moral urgency, tend to precede our scientific results. To prove an aging drug works in humans rather than worms, it could take us a full decade. So if we want more than unproven supplements or drugs that extend our unhealthy lifespan by 3 months, which is what free markets mostly optimize for, we're going to need to rethink our moral system and how we prevent and prioritize different types of death. And around now, you may be wondering, if we succeed and live to be 200, what could possibly go wrong? What if these life-saving therapeutics are inequitably distributed? I'll argue this is guaranteed. I come from rural Brazil, where the average person's odds of dying unpredictably are many times higher than in Massachusetts. It was in Brazil that I lost my amazing, wonderful, beloved sister, my best friend, in a car accident to no fault of her own. I also lost my nephew to a cardiovascular disease that might have been treatable in a Boston hospital. And it haunts me to know that had my amazing, incredible sister and nephew shared my zip code, they might have lived to 92. That's life expectancy in Boston, Back Bay. My sister left us at 33. My nephew wasn't even a year old. So why do I care about longevity, the fancy biotech type, when so many deaths could be prevented by paved roads? Consider the #1 cause of death globally, per the World Health Organization. Are Boston-led advancements in cardiovascular medicine immoral because they're not immediately available to every human? The answer is no. We need someone to subsidize these breakthroughs, and I'm glad we have the US doing that. Countries like Brazil are getting old before ever getting rich. So I'm proud to be a small part of US innovation. I, in fact, am just about to become a US citizen in 2 days. In a world with non-infinite resources, ethics and economics cannot be divorced. GDP correlates stunningly with most metrics of welfare we care about, from lower infant mortality rates to lower greenhouse gas emissions. Today, the wealthiest countries on the planet are the greenest, and the wealthiest neighborhoods have the highest life expectancy. GDP can go up as a result of high but ineffective spending, say in healthcare, but in the long run, high ineffective spending will lower GDP. So it's on us to figure out ways to humanely and sustainably grow the economy. Some people argue we shouldn't invest in biotech because we lack the ethics for it. And we know that today's institutions, laws, and ethics are not fit for 200-year-old humans, especially given our current health span. But from this, it doesn't follow that new institutions, laws, and ethics cannot be created. To conclude that we shouldn't extend human life because our existing culture cannot handle it would be as circular as to say in the 1920s that women shouldn't vote, antibiotics shouldn't be funded, or same-sex marriage should not be legal because we lacked the legal, institutional, or moral frameworks. Advancements in aging biotech hold the potential to mitigate the effects of pandemics, to lower the disease burden in every country, to reduce the suffering of grief, pain, and even age-related poverty. Our alien anthropologists might have observed that progress doesn't magically unfold when funerals take place. It's usually the result of living, hardworking, imperfect humans. Thank you.